Okay, thank you for coming to the Xanadu Review. My name is Prester Johns Revenge, but you can call me PJ. Today I have the great writer from Substack, Yakubian Ape. And Ape, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Why don't you? I think probably a good deal of my audience is probably pretty familiar with you. It seems like we have a good amount of overlap in our audiences. But why don't you just give, for maybe the people who aren't aware, like a brief rundown of you, kind of what you like to write about, a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump into it.
Yeah, hey, I imagine we do have a lot of overlap. It seems that way. I could only be so lucky. Uh, my publication is called The Lake of Lerna. It doesn't have much to do with the topic, but that's what I settled on when I first started. And at this point, I've built up a brand, and I'm scared to change it. I mostly
Same
write
here.
about.
I know exactly how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, it took me in a weird direction because, quite frankly, I started off writing about pop culture and stuff like that. Like, I really hit, at the time, I think Star Wars, the new Star Wars stuff was really beginning to drop off in earnest. I mean, not that it had ever really taken off when, ever since Disney bought it, but it was
A
really,
few moments, but yeah. So maybe like 2018, something like that. Because to me, that's when it really started to drop.
man, I mean, like, yeah, it really started to drop around that time. But I mean, one of the first articles I wrote, and one of the first articles to like actually get any traction, really was about the Galactic Star Cruiser. It had just opened, and that was one of my first articles. I've only been doing this for about a year, which is hard to believe, but
Mhm.
um, to me, that was like when I didn't think it could get any worse. It did get worse when they closed the damn thing like in less than a year, but that was one of the first things that I wrote about, and I was afraid that I'd be writing about Star Wars forever. But no, I've branched off into other topics. It's all pop culture, internet culture, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, I don't want to call myself an investigative journalist, but I think I do more actual investigative journalism when I research than pretty much anybody in the mainstream media right now.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the things I really love about your writing is it's a like I would say just kudos you're so damn prolific, man. Like I can do like one maybe two articles a month, and you're doing multiple articles a month. They're like what would you say your average word count is? Because a lot of the times I will because Substack the app has the like the text to voice feature, and I'll just I'll put in headphones while I'm working, and I'll listen to them, and it's like good. I feel like 30-45 minutes is your average.
Yeah, it's funny that it turned out that way because I am just a very verbose person by nature, and that natural tendency for verbosity kind of spiraled out of control, and I also have this weird need to be extremely thorough and explain everything, maybe a little too much. I've been told that I over explain and belabor the point sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that all kind of resulted in, yeah, some of the, for a while there, I was putting out articles that were regularly clocking in at like over a hour long read. And I was putting out one every week. I'm still trying to hit that one a week schedule, but I've kind of
Mm-hmm.
tapered it down and try to aim for a more comfortable 20 minutes, unless the occasion calls for it. Like with the Mr. Beast allegations, I didn't want to half-ass that, so that one turned into like 50 minutes.
Yeah, that was another one of those ones that to me, because I don't want to get too far off into that right now because I have kind of a framing question I want to start with. But yeah, I had kind of no idea about that. Like I don't know if you want to say like not even your exact age, but are you a millennial? You're a Zoomer? What's your rough age range?
I'm a millennial. I
Okay, yeah,
am definitely the portrait child of the late millennials.
yeah. I'm early 30s myself, and I knew that Mr. Beast was like something that kids liked, and for a long time, like I actually thought that like my conspiracy theory was that Mr. Beast is not real because he just looks like he's an AI generated. He does like the soy face. He has kind of a just kind of a strange look about him. So but I was like, wow, that was and we can get into that a little bit. So I guess what I kind of want to start with, since this I know one of your not your most recent article, because like I said, you're so prolific. One that I feel like really made a splash and created, at least in our circles, really quite a lot of discussion was your one about D&D. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the exact title, but it was like, the theater kid infiltration of
Yeah, it
D&D.
was the Attack of the Theater Kids.
Even better. Yeah, because we've kind of talked in the comments, the DMs about the theater kid menace, and because at least for me, like I'm also into a lot of this pop culture, at least like the nerdy stuff. I've been playing D&D since I was in high school, way back, and at this point 20 years ago, and it feels like you said, when you're late millennial, high school still feels like it's like 5 years ago, but wow, that was 20 years ago when I first started in like middle school or high school. But that do you want to like maybe jump into that a little bit, because I thought that I saw a couple people who write kind of subsequent articles from it, but I've been playing for years, and I saw recently, like the new rules dropped, and a lot of it to me was almost kind of puzzling, because I've been playing since I think 3.5 D&D 3.5 edition, for the people who don't follow it, um, and that was, I think, early to mid 2000s when that came out. And what I always liked about D&D was it was already inherently an inclusive thing. When you talk about the it's almost, I almost don't even like using the term because it's so loaded, but the diversity and inclusion thing. But
Hmm.
D&D was already so inherently inclusive. You could be literally anything, but like they made rule changes that like maybe in their head was being more inclusive. But the joke is, they got rid of like half elves and half orcs, and it's well, to fight racism, they banned race mixing. So, do you want to maybe jump into like a little bit of your thoughts on that, and I guess what a theater kid means to you? Because to me, it's not necessarily somebody who's like been in theater, because I'm married to a theater kid, and her parents are in theater, and they're all great, and I've played D&D with them, and they've loved it. But it just to me, some of these choices really seem baffling.
Yeah, and the thing is, you're completely right. I don't really see Theater Kid as having much to do with the art of live theater. I was a theater kid myself in high school. I was in the performing arts.
Mhm.
I didn't quite like it as much as I liked acting on camera, but I was good at it. My teacher really liked me, so I got all these like lead roles in the UIL plays and all that kind of stuff. And I actually stopped because I really didn't like the other kids involved. But I was also in band, and they were even worse theater kids, if that makes sense. I mean,
Mhm.
just in terms of that personality type, because that's the thing. It's like not everybody who's in theater is a theater kid, but it's like I said, a lot of them were in band, and they're kind of like those little suck asses. They're the ones that really
Mhm.
like piss up and brown nose, and they're like the teacher's pet, and they always have to do their best and that kind of thing. And they're always what to me the theater word, the theater part of the name, is more apropos when ascribed to how they act as opposed to what they do, because everything, the way that they act, is everything is hyperbolic, everything is exaggerated, everything is like they're on a bad camp TV show or in like just the worst live community theater you've ever seen. They're never, I said this in the article, they're never happy. They're like bouncing off the walls, like obnoxiously exuberant. They're never depressed. They're, just, or sorry, they're never just mildly upset. They're depressed, and whatever's bothering them is the end of the world. Um, when they have a problem, it's never just a minor problem. It's always like a five-alarm DEFCON 1 emergency, and they go into hysterics. And but there's also an element of manipulation that I feel like is inherent in it, because I don't know if I edited this out of the piece because I didn't want to belabor the point or like go on or go off on a tangent about it. But one of the biggest things about theater kids, and this is what I really see when I see them act like that in my everyday life, because you run into these people. They're not exactly
Mhm.
uncommon. It's I think a better, more accurate way of describing them would be cluster B personality disorders, histrionic, narcissistic, anxiety, just, that kind of stuff, BPD. That's probably what a lot of them are affected by. And to an extent, I think that um, maybe that would just be a better way of classifying them. But when it comes to these people, and like I said, I deal with them quite frequently in various aspects of my life. You can never tell if they're being honest with you. you can never tell if they're being upfront or genuine because their emotions and the way that they act and the way they express themselves are always so paired up and exaggerated and hyperbolic that you always feel like they're just putting you on and telling you what you want to hear and manipulating you basically. And the worst part is a lot of them, at least most of the ones that I've met, have been in very petty, very juvenile, very quick to anger. And if you get in their bad, their book of grudges, your name's never coming out. They will do everything they can to tear you down and get you out of the way. And when it comes to D&D, one of the reasons that I was thinking about it so much is because I started playing with some friends in town recently, and I was having a really good time. And another Substacker, Alexander Helene, shout
Mhm.
out. I hope I'm
I'm a
pronouncing
big
that
fan
right.
too. Yeah, no, I think that's
Um,
right. Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote the first article where his article I believe was literally just called like "Who is this for?" and he posted the now infamous piece of art from the updated player's handbook, or maybe it was a module, I don't remember, but it's a new
Mhm.
thing for D&D, and there was a guy in a wheelchair, and there's all these rules about how wheelchairs can be used in dungeons and how dungeons are ADA compliant now, and it's and his whole thing was like, who is this for? Like, who is asking for this? Who wanted this and why was it necessary? Because like you said, D&D, you could do whatever the hell you wanted. Nobody ever said your character couldn't be in a wheelchair. It's a little impractical, but you could do it if you wanted to.
Mhm.
And it's not like there aren't other, Professor X is in a wheelchair. I don't never stopped him from being a badass. It's not like you can't. They act like they moved mountains or like friggin' had their march on Washington over putting in wheelchair rules in D&D. It was just silly. It was absurd. But like I said, his article was titled "Who is this for?" and it just immediately connected to me. I was like, well, it's for the theater kids who came into the hobby and really started colonizing it back when things like Critical Role and Adventure Zone took off, which are D&D related podcasts played by voice actors and professional
Sure.
podcasters that have a very big theater kid following, especially the Adventure Zone.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think you put it really well, because I feel like to me that's the nexus, and um specifically Critical Role, because it is literally like, they were all actors, whereas Adventure Zone was I can't. It's the McElroy brothers and their dad. I'm trying to think. Did you ever listen to their like original podcast? I didn't ever listen to that. I only ever listened to Adventure Zone because they were
Yeah,
just like,
my brother and me.
yeah. Because I remember right around, it was like early, I guess late 2010s or so, when I first started, like, I just moved to a new city, and I had my core group of friends I met through starting a D&D game, and then I would, like, because it was very, like, there was a time in like the late 2010s, where it was a very chic thing to do, and I think you touched on that too, because you had Critical Role, you had what was it, that
Stranger
80s
Things.
Stranger Things, yeah. And I started to see like a certain type of person start to show up, and that, like, kind of like you said, it was super super performative, and there was always that aspect of in D&D, that, of it, the joke has been like, it's the cross section of the theater kids and the math dorks, but it was a different type of person that started showing up. I remember there was this one guy that I worked with that we were playing with, and he was being like, first, like, he showed up and he had, all right, well, here's all of my backstory, read all this, here's all the characters that I want you, for my backstory, I want you to insert. And I was like, okay, I liked the enthusiasm at first, but it was very like, okay, this is my story, I want it to be like it is on Critical Role. And then I forget exactly what it was, but like, we had our group chat, and he had something that set him off. um and then he was just freaking out on everybody, and we're trying to get him to calm. And I was like, no, this is triggering me. You can't get mad at me. And it's like, well, first of all, on one hand, like, even if because I actually, I feel like some people who are like, quote unquote, anti woke DEI, whatever you want to call it, go a little bit too far. Because personally, like, I don't have a problem with, like, okay, no, this is something that's a no go for me. Because I'll always, like, when I DM, I'll say, I'll say my rules are always like, I won't do any rape, I won't do anything to, bad things happening to children, and there will be no gratuitous violence. If there's something you have that's like, for whatever reason, that's a no go, I don't mind doing that. but you also don't get to like yell at people and say, this is my trauma, this is my, my cross to bear. And we ended up having to ban him. And then, of course, come to find out, we talked, he got into it because of Critical Role. And I met more and more people who like had not to that degree with that specific instance, but like it was more about, it felt like they wanted to be basically in Critical Role or some sort of
Hmm.
like very performative thing, to the point where like now I have a soft rule. If somebody says like they got into D&D because of Critical Role, I won't necessarily like say no, but I'm like kind of look at them askance, because I think you really hit the nail on the head. It's a very performative, not in a way like you're goofing around, you're do a silly accent with your friends. It's like they're performing for an audience that isn't there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of it is, I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an expert on cluster B personality disorders, but I do know, like, I always got the feeling that they kind of do it for themselves. Like, they're trying to buy into their own
Mhm.
hype. They do it because they want something out of somebody. And, like, not to go off on a tangent, but, like, a great example is, like, in the convention scene, a lot of conventions nowadays, you see a lot of people who use mobility aids, whether it be, those little scooters or canes or
Mhm.
walkers, even. Like, I mean, you've got teenagers walking around like they've got MS, you know, and I know they don't. Or service dogs, that's another big one. You got people bringing in
Mhm.
service dogs, and these are like little weenie rat dogs that look like
Mhm.
they have more anxiety than their owner. And I'm like, there's no way that thing is a
I have a
licensed
Chihuahua that
service
checks out.
dog.
They're very anxious.
Yeah, and I mean,
Mhm.
it's like you can tell that dog's not a security or not security service dog, but I know for a fact because I used to date a girl who'd do this. It's very easy to lie about that. It's very easy to get the papers, even if it's all bunk. But either way, you see a lot of these people, and you just kind of know that most of them are doing it for attention. Maybe they do have something that is an issue, but they're really playing it up for everything that it's worth. I know people who've got like chronic pain that they can't get diagnosed X, Y, and Z, and they're always kind of like in some degree of pain in their limbs, but they don't walk around with a walker so that everybody knows they are the most in pain person here. It's all very
Mhm.
perform. I mean, performative is the only way I can do it. It's like, look at me. I'm the most. I'd be sorry for me. I need a walker, and I'm only 19. That kind of thing.
Yeah, it is interesting because sometimes, and not to get too off on the tangent of the psychological thing, because and maybe that's related to some of the stuff I've seen you talk about the very performative, like people who will diagnose themselves based off of TikTok. And there's like, I suppose you could say, that panopticon of you seeing this community of people who have this real disease, this real disorder, and they feel like I feel want to be special, or maybe they do or don't have it, and then they perform that, and it kind of loops in on itself like that.
Yeah, and I mean that's become increasingly common as TikTok has proliferated over the years, where there's just so many people who they get on there and like I not to go off too topic another topic, but it's like for example, great example is this was really popular on Tumblr a couple years back, like almost a decade now. It's hard to believe it's been that long, but it was like the heads. They literally called themselves like multiples or head cases or something. They're people that were faking having DID, dissociative identity disorder,
Mhm.
and DID in the real world does not work like it does in the movies. Like the person does not just blink and suddenly be a different person. That's not at all how it works. It's more like they enter a dissociative state and they don't really act like themselves. And when they come out of it, they don't really remember doing anything that they might have done while in that state. That's as far as I understand it. From what I've researched, there are psychologists who don't even believe it's a real thing. But these people would swear up and down that they have DID, and they've got 18 different personalities, all with their different names and whatever.
Mhm.
And if this one came to the front, then they were going to act like a fucking lunatic. And oh, you can't hold me accountable. That was my headmate Bob. It wasn't me. It
Mhm.
was Bob. He came out and he wasn't happy with you. It's just it's insanity. I mean, it's almost more insane than somebody who's actually got these problems.
Yeah, it definitely feels like there's sometimes maybe like a desire to, like you said, have that lack of accountability and just be able to kind of center yourself in these spaces. So kind of on that note, you mentioned the convention scene, you mentioned Tumblr, some of these spaces. So it sounds like you've been in kind of like the fandom world for quite a while. Would you say that?
Oh yeah, no,
Mhm,
absolutely longer than I should have been.
mhm. So,
Um,
sorry, I was just gonna say how. So, if that's the case, like, how would you say, like, would you characterize the change over the last, 10, 15 years? Because I'm not exactly super deep in the fandom. I have a couple of different things. Like, I was really into Star Wars. I kind of dropped off after The Last Jedi. Um, D&D, and we can probably get into some of those, but it sounds like in the fandom world, because even like the little bit that I did engage with it, and that's something I wrote about recently, that it just kind of stopped being fun because you saw kind of those type of people and the reaction to it, and it became just this feedback loop that it just became so toxic that it wasn't fun to be a part of anymore.
yeah, and I mean, it was always there was always weird elements to it. Like I'm gonna say, at least I joined Tumblr in 2012. That's how long I've been in that little world, and quite frankly, everybody has an idea of what Tumblr is. They're all wrong. It's entirely different. I've been there long enough to know
Hmm.
that it is not what most people think it is. It is not nearly the site it was in 2012. It is a totally different site from what it was in 2012. And 2012 was like when it was like the fandom mecca, more or less. And
Hmm.
you had all those people who were really into like Supernatural and Doctor Who, and it was
Hmm.
it. That's what people think Tumblr still is, but it's not. Those
Hmm.
people have since moved to TikTok, and a lot of them went to Twitter after. So Tumblr banned pornography a couple years ago, and that was the best thing they ever did on the site because then it made all these people leave and go to Twitter, and Twitter got
Hmm.
exponentially worse. Um, but that all being said, Tumblr always had kind of like this weird school marmish feel to it, the fandom aspect of it at least. Like I was just there for the funny pictures. To me, it was like iFunny, but on Tumblr. But whenever I left my small little walled garden I'd made for myself by carefully cultivating who I followed, I would just be amazed at the toxicity and the general just like sense of hostility and acrimony all these people had for each other in the same fandoms. I mean, like that's why I would really like to go back and write about some of these issues and stories. Like I wrote one about the Snape wives of Harry Potter fandom lore. It's basically a legend in the Harry Potter community at this point, and even the Harry Potter community isn't what it used to be. But that's neither really here nor there. The point is, like that happened on LiveJournal in 2005, 2006. I mean, it predates Tumblr by a couple of years. So, what I'm trying to get at, but when I say that, is that this toxicity in the fandom has been around since fandom's been a concept. I'm sure if I did more research on early Trek fandom, I would find that the scene back in the 80s and 70s is probably just as toxic as a lot of it is today. But I think the biggest difference was that a lot of those toxic elements you could just kind of tune out and not pay attention to. You didn't have to engage with them. You didn't really. I can think of various properties that I was engaged in or fandoms that I paid attention to, and I didn't see any of this kind of like drama until I'd go to a convention and then I'd be like, oh, so that's why these people have like the reputation they do. It's because they're acting like lunatics in public, and sure enough, you go out and look at them on Tumblr, and they're sending each other death threats, they're stalking each other, they're doxing each other. I mean, it's crazy. But I feel like at some point that wall between people who were just there to have fun and people who were taking it too seriously kind of came down, and I feel like part of that is this totalitarian progressive ideology and also the sense that everything has to be for everyone. So when it comes to this fandom stuff, like hypothetically, if me and my friends are sitting around and we're talking about like, or being a group of internet friends or whatever, or talking about this in a Discord server, it would be not good for our reputations if we said, "Oh no, nobody else can join this," because it's got to be open. It's got to be open for everybody. So then everybody else is going to come in and they're going to bring their bullshit with them, and then they're also going to tell us what we can and can't do, what we can and can't say, and then eventually they end up driving us out, and we don't want anything to do with it anymore.
Hmm. It kind of reminds me. Did you ever see? I think it was like a web comic infographic of like the circle of tolerance.
Yes, and it reminds me of like the what is it? There's another one. I tried to look for it, but I couldn't find it. And it was something like the life
Mm.
cycle of a hobby, where it's like, you have the original players, the community grows, then you get your outsiders and like social parasites who come in just for the clout, and eventually they outnumber the original people, and all the original people leave, and what's left is like a hollow husk of what it was.
Yeah. No, I know kind of exactly what you mean. That's again kind of what drove me away from it because it became just this very toxic back and forth between, again, like you said, whatever you want to call that, hyper militant progressivism, which kind of ironically, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit, it's either with that or the D&D having the wheelchairs in it. Because again, like, just to backtrack ever so slightly on a side note, like, if you wanted to have a D&D character in a wheelchair, you could have totally done that. You could have, it wouldn't have necessarily had to like even change the mechanics, but you could have done that. But there's like this, I've heard it called, like, it's a very emotionally blackmailing, where you bake into the rules or the lore of the fandom this very specific type of progressivism, whatever you want to call it, that is a very a specific ideology, a specific aesthetic, which either you can either buy into this really kind of idiosyncratic aesthetic and worldview that, I mean, I think as we're seeing with a lot of recent failed projects, only appeals to a very small type of person, or you're a bigot. And then you have the other side of the branch, who either feel they're being emotionally blackmailed, or just trolls, or sometimes legitimately bigoted, and then they'll just go at each other, and they both kind of double down on it. And because, to me, as somebody who was only ever casually into this type of stuff, at a certain point it just made the spaces too toxic, and too unappealing. I just ended up kind of leaving because of it.
Yeah, and like to kind of backtrack and like I guess explain a little bit better, like a great example is like of what you're talking about and why it happened. I think really comes down to, how I said like everybody could just kind of have their own space and you didn't have to engage with it if you didn't
Mhm.
want to. Well, it was like when these people came into it, these people with these very, progressive ideologies that they wanted to enforce on everybody else, they sought you out. They would go find you and they would tell you you can't do that. Like you got to get rid of that. I forgot what convention it was, but there was somebody who was literally going around to the artist alley where they have all the artists selling the prints of their stuff. And there was one thing in particular, I don't remember what it was, but they had drawn like there was a character that people in the fandom wanted depicted as black, a minority of them, right?
Mhm.
So they were going around to people at artists at Artist Alley. Some of them fly all over the country, bust their ass to set up and sell their wares and make a living, right? So this person has the audacity to go up to these people, and everyone who had art of this character, they gave them like a dissertation on why that was racist and why they were bad. And not just that, but they collected all of their names and then published like a hit list on Tumblr of all these artists that they had seen, and they were like, don't interact with this person, block them, blah blah blah, whatever. And it was just heinous,
Wait,
and
so was the character originally black and somebody made them white, or whatever it was? Were they not originally black? And like the head canon, I think is the term that.
yes.
Oh,
Yes,
wow.
yes, it was an anime, and I can't for the life of me remember which one it was, but it was an anime, and like there was a character who had like slightly darker skin than the rest of the cast, and for whatever reason, some of these whack jobs internalized that as this character must be of Africa, sub-Saharan African descent. And if you did not draw it the right way, God help you. I mean, they still have fights over that on Twitter. Like, look at
Mhm.
what's that one game, Genshin Impact? Yeah, they have like a civil war every other month when they announce a new character whose skin isn't dark enough and the game's too white and X, Y, and Z. Well, number one, it's made by people in China. They don't care. Number two, I mean, who cares? Play a different game if you don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of always been my attitude with all of this. And I got one thing I do want to touch on before I get into that, but I would say, I don't know about your experience, because for a long time, maybe not a super long time, there was a period of 2 or 3 years where there was a anime convention where I lived. Um, it was kind of a smaller local thing, and I volunteered for, and we'd go to all the other conventions and volunteer within my state and some closer ones. And weirdly enough, it was already, and this was kind of pre this whole conversation, but it was already like pretty progressive, pretty welcoming. It was kind of a
Hmm.
catch-all for, nerdy people. There was a lot of overlap with the LGBT community. Nobody really cared. Nobody really had a problem. And then suddenly it became border. I saw that too. It became borderline religious almost.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I mean that's exactly
Hmm.
my experience with it too. And I think because, and that's what I said in the D&D article. It's like these spaces were already left leaning, but libertarian left maybe, but they were not
Hmm.
bastions of conservative thought or anything like that. You know, these people weren't reactionaries. They weren't staunch right wingers. Most of them, if you ask them where they came down, they'd probably come down somewhere on the left.
Hmm.
And they were very welcoming and very open to all this stuff. And yeah, it's just fascinating that because they were so welcoming, that's what set them up for this. And it was the same thing with like all the. It's why I feel like you saw this kind of insanity hit the furry fandom first, and I wrote about that in my Brony retrospective, because with the furry fandom, you really saw those guys lose the plot earlier than just about any other
Hmm.
fandom. Like you probably remember when they were like the pinnacle of weird on the internet.
Yeah, that and bronies, and it's also funny that you say that because at least because I kind of checked out of that scene other than like I just enjoy it for myself or the online spaces. But when I was a part of it, because I never did Tumblr, but like circa, I think like 2007 to 2011, when I was in like high school ish, I was on 4chan. And then, I don't know if you ever were at that time, but it was a completely different
Oh
world
yeah,
back
no,
then.
I
Kind of
was.
like, it's kind of the same thing where like everything you think about 4chan now, not really. There was like, some edginess. And I remember they did like, there was a prank where like, they had an open contest for name a Mountain Dew flavor, and they called it the Hitler did nothing wrong flavor. And like, but the
Yeah.
subtext was not like, yes, we think Hitler did nothing wrong. It's like, oh, let's screw over these dumb corpos for leaving this as an open invitation. But
Hmm.
all and that, I mean, maybe that's the other side we can touch on it too, because some people like go way too hard in the other direction. But since you mentioned furries, it just maybe that is the a good place to jump into it a little bit, because it feels like that was kind of the maybe the ground zero of the terminally online. Because to me, the stereotype was like if somebody's a furry, they're either like a gay communist, super lefty, or they are like a white supremacist with no in between.
Yeah, no, and the funny thing is, like, the same thing happened with the bronies, really. I saw someone about 2 years ago or so, maybe it was even longer. Maybe it was during the 2020 election. I don't know. But either way, somebody pointed out, they were like, did you notice that all the bronies either became trans or legitimate white supremacists? And there's like no in between. And you do a little bit of legwork, and it's not untrue. I mean, of course, it's hyperbole for the sake of
Mhm.
comedy, but there is a disturbing amount of them that went either trans or legitimate, like neo-Nazi, and it is a very strange dichotomy, and you do see that in the furry fandom as well. And full disclaimer, I was never involved in the furry fandom. They were always just kind of around. And
Mhm.
if you couldn't tell, I love a good trash fire. So I've
Mhm.
dove through
They
their
always were.
archives. Yeah, to to look through some of the drama for a cheap laugh. So I know enough about them that I can confidently say that they were like the proto bronies in that way. And I think
Mhm.
what both of those communities did to kind of get to that point where they either became like the super ultra mega trans communist or a legitimate neo-Nazi. I think what happened is like they were already communities of outsiders that were the butt of the joke of other outsiders. You know, the furries, you saw them at these conventions and everybody just kind of like stayed away from them. And, maybe not
Mhm.
everybody, but most
They got
people didn't
bullied by
really
the
want.
other nerds.
More or less. I mean, it was
Mhm.
the same thing with
Mhm.
the brownies. Like, I cannot tell you how many times in like 2012 when the brownie, or maybe 2011, whatever, whenever the brownie stuff was at its peak and you could not throw a rock in a convention center without hitting one of those guys, they would do stuff in public, and I swear I would like look at people. If I was at the bar and okay, let me back up. There is actually a story that goes with this. It was in Austin, Texas. I was at a convention. I was sitting at the hotel bar, and a bunch of these bronies come in, and they look exactly like what you would expect. And one of them shouts, and he's waving a T-shirt on a flag, like on a pole, like it's a flag, and it's got one of the like the pony marks or whatever on it. And he says like, "We are claiming this bar for Equestria." And I
Ugh.
literally looked at like the bartender, and I was like, we are not all associated with them, just so you know." Like they were
Yeah,
doing, they were the outcasts of the outcast, you know?
yeah, I remember that. I guess I because you mentioned because that you were in the convention scene, I was a little bit too for a while. But also like since we're obviously we both said we're like the mid to older millennials, but you mentioned like the 70s and the 80s because there's always been stories of fans being weird, over the top. And it's always, I think there's a certain personality type, or maybe if you're just a little bit on the outside for whatever reason, you're drawn to these things. But how much of it do
Hmm.
you think it is personality type, and how much of it do you think is just because of the nature of internet communities that, because it feels like to me like this is just changed and gone kind of nuts at an exponential rate. It feels kind of inorganic that maybe if it weren't in these online communities that, and again, like with the furries being, Nazis or, trans communist, one of the two, like it seems like that it kind of maps the bifurcation of internet culture and how the horse. I generally think like when people talk about horseshoe theory, it's a kind of a hack thing to say, but I think in the case of like the type of person who's drawn to internet fandom or like internet politics, which is really kind of its own fandom in its own way, that
Yeah.
it's going to be more common because of this really weird, very inorganic social circle.
I think it's both. I think it's both, and they feed off each other in the worst way, because like I don't know much about the convention scene prior to when I got involved. The documentation is pretty poor, for obvious reasons. I mean, like you can go find stories, and like there were famous conventions that there are pictures of, and every now and then you come across like a blog post of somebody who was at whatever Acon 93, and it's all very cool, but there's not much documentation. And mostly by the time I got in there, the old heads were being phased out and the new blood, and it was really turning over. So I can't really say like I know for sure, but based on what I have seen, I think it was always a personality type. The loners, the awkward ones, the guys with unconventional interests who are kind of on the outskirts of everything. The guys who don't quite fit in, the nerds, the dorks, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
They're naturally attracted to this stuff as kind of like a easy form of community. I think that some of these communities build more earnestly than others, and if that doesn't make sense, I'll explain that. And using the bronies, for example, I don't think that a lot of bronies. I would say like maybe half of them, if I had to take a guess, a completely uneducated guess, maybe half of them actually really like the show. I think that most of them probably just liked being part of a community. I think that they liked what the wholesome nature. They always talked about how wholesome it was, like how it was all about friendship and inclusiveness and this, that, and the third. I think that that was what attracted a lot of people to it, and I think that's why they stayed. And I think that can be said for a lot of communities. Is maybe the people don't really like maybe they like it, but they don't love it. But they're there for the
Mhm.
community first and foremost because they don't have another community, and they can basically just jump into this one and be welcomed with open arms. But where the internet comes into play is that the internet, if we have seen anything, has a way of exponentially speeding up everything. Um, it feels like there's always that whole joke where it's like, a month in internet time is like 50 years, or a month in the real world is like 50
Yeah.
years on the internet. That one girl who did the hawk tuah thing or whatever. I mean, she's already old hat. You never
Yeah.
hear about her. And she was all over the internet for like what, a week, and it feels like that
Mhm.
was years ago that whole thing happened. It was only like less than 2 months ago. So I think like when you take these communities full of insular, awkward people who, let's be completely honest, are not the best socialized most of the time, you put them in the internet, and these internet like um, in whatever pressure cookers basically, which is what a Discord server might as well be. And the natural course that it would take years to play out of them all falling apart and attacking each other and turning on one another, for whatever reason, by nature of the internet, just it goes into hyperdrive, and a collapse that would take 10 years is done in a couple months.
Hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean. And I kind of with the brony thing, I also remember at the time, because that was very early 2010s when I first started hearing about it, and I knew one guy who was really into it who, he looked exactly how you would imagine. He literally like, he specifically said, "Oh, I'm growing a neck beard. It's a look," and specifically chose the fedora, which even at the time in the early 2010s was
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
cringe, but he was specifically doing it. But it almost felt like with to me, like the brony thing, it never really felt earnest. It was always like, it was kind of like, I don't want to say punk rock, but like they were specifically trying to get a reaction like, "Oh, I'm a
Hmm.
guy, but I like a thing for little girls. It ain't that wacky." And it's, yeah, I feel like they're trying to get that reaction on purpose. And I wonder sometimes, because I mean, if to backtrack with the theater kids, I feel like that's the reaction that they're trying to get even people who are like, "Yeah, I have no problem with gay people. I have no problem with trans people." But it's like, you have to do those extra levels of pushing to show that you're, and again, it feels like it's not even about ultimately making a better place for gay people, trans people, minorities of any stripe. It's about these people showing and wanting to be seen as the type of person who is, cares about that thing. So a quick little anecdote that, since it reminded me of that, um, before I throw it back to you, is for a little while I was playing D&D with another group that we started, and it was one of those types of people, and it was like the very like prototypical, like, super super progressive guy. And he loved, talked about, the theater and the, the queer inclusion side, which again, no problem with me personally. But he was just like the most narcissistic person you'd ever met. He would just like talk over everybody. And one time we were having a game, and he, spoke over, my then girlfriend. And it's like, then he just made this very big show of, "Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm trying to acknowledge my privilege and grow and change. And I don't want to interrupt women." And then within like, 20 minutes, he interrupted me and just like completely bowled over me. So, it's not like you don't want to be a nice, kind, and empathetic person who just, doesn't interrupt people. You want to be seen as the type of person who doesn't interrupt women, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, no, I mean that is kind of the thing, is like it's all about, and that's why I go back to the cluster B personality disorder, which includes, I believe, somebody can check me on this. Check their what is it,
Mhm.
DSM-5
Mhm.
handbook, if they even still use that. But like they're narcissists to the core. They always want to look good. They always want to be the center of attention. They need it. They need it like, the rest of us need air to breathe. When you don't pay attention to them, they take it as a personal offense, because to them that is the most important thing. I don't know how you end up in that position, but that is what happens. And I don't think that a lot of those brony guys really line up with it. Maybe they do now. Maybe it was only just beginning to happen in their heads at that time. But I feel like a lot of you're right in the sense, like I do think that there was a degree of, and you're absolutely 100% right when you said that they were doing it for the reaction of some of them. I Like I said, I think that they legitimately like the show, but a lot of them really did milk that whole like, "Oh, we're guys that watch a show for little girls. What are you gonna do about it?" thing very,
Mhm.
very hard. And yeah, I had somewhere to go with that, but I forgot. So
That's
it might come
okay.
back to me.
And I have a couple other things on that topic, but I feel like this is a good segue for one of the other things that you wrote recently that pinged my radar about the failure of the game Concord. And for the audience who doesn't know, and I'm sure Abe can get into this in a lot better detail, but it was this game that kind of had a lot of different things going against it. I'm not really a gamer, but I just know that it was like a historic failure. Like, low estimates are $100 million to $400 million that was spent on it, and I think at its height that it was, people were playing it was like 600, like 620 people, which for a game of that size, it's like, if a big blockbuster movie where 600 people play it or go to see it rather. And the conversation about it has been, they tried to make it super super socially progressive, all these different body types, like, obese women. I think they probably did. I didn't look into it super strong of like, all that type of super progressive, like, vitiligo, the different, gender representation, and it just completely bombed. And the conversation has been, well, did it bomb because of this? Did it bomb because it was an oversaturated market? But it does kind of beg the question, at least to me, um, to like, when you see like these type of people, kind of like we were talking about, like overall, like, the stereotype, I think, that has come out unfairly is, gamers, geeks, whatever, are, sexist, racist, etc. Where, like, at least in my experience before that, nobody really cared, right? But now you see this giant failure, and you see with Concord and all these shows that have been canceled. Like, is this, the supposed modern audience? Does this exist? Or is this like specific, very performative version of progressivism just doesn't really appeal to that many people? Or, was it something else?
I think it's a generally kind of a mix of all of those things. I mean, a lot of people say, like, Tim Pool, man, he loves his "Go Woke, Go Broke" little slogan, but that's
Hmm.
demonstrably not true.
Hmm.
You brought up Disney. Disney has eaten more money over the past year with just flop after flop after flop, and are they broke? I
Hmm.
don't see it.
Well, there's also been so
Um,
many successes too.
Yeah, I mean, notably less than they used to. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
during, I'm sure you do, like, the mid 2000s, man, they were like hitting everything out of the park. And then
Hmm.
it felt like overnight they just stopped. Like
Well,
they can't make a good movie to save their lives.
feels like there's a tipping point both with quality and because, and again, like, because to me, I follow this. It's not necessarily the type of thing I'm always in. Like, Concord got on my radar because this is like, I've heard it described like this will be taught in business school some days because it's
Yeah.
a failure of such great magnitude. But, things like Black Panther did super well. Wonder Woman did super well. But at least to me, I enjoyed those movies because they were just good movies. And yeah, it had more, representation, which personally I don't have a problem with. I think that's great to it's better to have more types of people making more stories because that only makes it better. But then around, at least for like, it felt like around 2020, like, I don't know if it was the pandemic or maybe it was just things from, the 2016 election that had been in the pipeline, but it became, instead of like, oh, let's just make a good movie, and it happens to have more diversity, which it seems like nobody really cared about. Some people felt represented, and that was great, to like this very spiteful way of trying to like kind of get at this very, to me, like, it's a very small portion of the audience that are bigots. And that's something that I wrote about recently, that it just feels like the writers are spiteful and trying to get back at, people who are mean to them on Twitter.
Well, and I feel oftentimes like these people are mad about things that really don't exist anymore. I mean, like they are so bitter, like bitter and spiteful is the right word, but they're bitter and spiteful about like a regime and a time and but basically a country that just doesn't exist anymore. They talk about like a male dominated, heavily Christian, overwhelmingly white America that they have to rebel against, and that's
Mhm.
just not the case anymore. I mean, I know some people don't want to hear it, but that's just not America of 2024. We all know it. It's
I
a
don't know.
radically
I would
different
agree.
place. What?
I said, no, I said I would agree. It feels like that, it feels like they're, almost still rebelling against Ronald Reagan's America, because at least to me, like, because I guess and not getting too into politics, but I came, at this point, I would say I'm just kind of more politically homeless, heterodox, whatever you want to call it. But I came up more so on the left, and I never felt like I was excluded from these spaces or like it was bad. But I definitely grew up with that, like, oh, that's what America is, which, because I feel like I consumed media growing up that was made by people who grew up in the Reagan era. And, to the degree that that was true back then, I don't know. But whether or not that was true then, it's definitely not true now. And you're doing this because I remember, like, and again, like, I have Star Wars has specifically, like, when people are getting mad at there being diversity in Star Wars, it's like, dude, shut up. It's space. It does. I mean, it's space. It's the future. It doesn't really matter to me. But I remember seeing for one of the recent Disney projects that, I mean, more than likely has been canceled at this point. It was this, the director of the movie said, "Oh, I want to make men feel uncomfortable," and for me, he was like ambivalent about it. It's like, "Oh, okay, well, I guess this one isn't for me. I'm just going to sit it out," and I've been sitting out pretty much, not even for reasons like that for the most part. In that specific case, yes, I just at this point, like, I just don't feel like I need to see any of this.
Yeah, and I mean it's funny because we do keep going back to this, but it's the God's honest truth. Is that these spaces were never include or exclusive. Like
Mhm.
Star Wars, I remember when the Force Awakens came out. That was the first of the new ones, right? I'm drawing a
Yeah,
blank.
correct. Yeah.
So I remember when that came out, and like you had legitimate racists saying, "I can't believe they put a black guy in Star Wars," and you had these progressive ideologues saying,
Mhm.
"Wow, it's about time there were black guys in Star Wars." And I was like, "Did any of you people watch the first three fucking movies?"
Yeah. The first
Like,
six, for that matter.
yeah, I mean, yeah. Do you
Nice window.
Mace Windu, Lando Calrissian? I mean, a
Mhm.
fun fact, I don't, just for what it's worth, is that Lando was put in the movie because George Lucas wanted more black people in the movie to sell toys to black kids. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah, I'd heard that. That's why he has the purple lightsaber too. Because Sam Jack's like, I want a purple lightsaber, and George is like, okay. But yeah, I mean, and here's the thing: like, it definitely could be better, but I feel like, for example, I think there have been criticisms, and even like the feminist criticism aside, that in the original movies, Princess Leia was awesome in the first one, and by the end of the last one, she was just kind of there. So, fair enough. But I think, or, the joke was always, Lando Calrissian, he's the one black guy in the universe. But it wasn't like George Lucas being like, I don't want black people and I'm just going to have two. It was, it was made in the 70s. It was a different time. Whereas now it just, because the one thing that did strike me was in the Star Wars, like, there, at least circa, I stopped watching at The Last Jedi and I watched like a season and a half of The Mandalorian. There was not like a single white male who was not a bad guy, which to
mhm.
me, like, that feels like a very specific choice. And at a certain point, like, I don't think you can blame people for either checking out because of that, or just, I think even like normal people are starting to pick up on the toxicity now. Because I don't know, did you watch the She-Hulk show, or have you heard about it?
I didn't watch it, but I heard enough about it from, certain people. But
Yeah.
on YouTube, like I used to watch like all those videos that would just tear into
Mhm.
those shows again and again and again. And then I just realized I'm as much of a battered wife as these people for even caring, for even like
Yeah.
paying attention. Like I'll go and do like the basic legwork to find out what's going on, like what shows are out. Sometimes it gives me some
Mhm.
great stuff to write about. I wrote all that stuff about the Captain Marvel movie. Never saw the damn movie, didn't want to, didn't care, but it gave me something to talk about because it was pretty interesting to watch. They set Brie Larson up to be the next big thing in Marvel, and she flopped.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, well,
so
that's kind of what I was getting at with, again, like, these YouTube guys who will do it, and it's something that I wrote about recently. I didn't watch She-Hulk because I have not watched any Marvel since Endgame. I feel like I got what I wanted to out of it, just because, like, I think it was a story that was fun. It was well told. I'm done with it. But I found out in the She-Hulk show that they made one of the major villains. They based off one of those like YouTuber guys who will tear apart these. Um, all these new Marvel shows. And to me, that is so baffling as somebody who is not a part of that world at all. It's just so confusing. And to me, so petty that you would do that. Like, you're already, presumably very wealthy if you're in these positions. You're already famous. Why are you letting random people on Twitter get to you?
well, yeah, and that's like the whole. I completely agree. I forgot about that until you brought it up. Like now
Mhm.
that you say that, I remember it.
What's the guy's name? Do you know?
The
Doom
literally the
Clock.
only
Yeah, I looked it up. This
literally
guy had
the
like 100,000 YouTube subscribers, which it's nothing to shake a
oh,
stick at, but
yeah.
relatively compared to like Marvel, that it's insane that that guy would even be on your radar.
Well, and trust me, yeah, Doomcock or whatever, man. I have come within a hair's breadth of writing just the most scathing hit piece on him because he is He's a character. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but suffice to say, he is a grifter of the highest order. He is an absolute like he's. I don't think he's a good guy,
Well,
but
it
that's just
wouldn't
me.
surprise me that you say grifter, and I know that's something that gets thrown around a lot because I've been watching. I read a whole bunch of your articles again, kind of in preparation to do this. But today, just at work, I was listening to a lot of those types of videos, and I literally heard a guy say, because they're talking about, I guess there's a petition to bring back the acolyte, and I guess they're trying to raise like $2,000 for advertising to do a campaign, which to me already sounds like a grift. But the guy who
Yeah,
was one of these like anti SJW, whatever you want to call it, he's like, if paying $2,000 would bring back the show, I would do it because that show made me so much money. Because at this point they're making like so much bank just like shitting on these things that at this point I joke like basically the only ones who are watching like the Acolyte or Rings of Power were like YouTubers who were going to shit on it.
yeah, and that's the whole thing that always like. That's actually one of the first things I wanted to write about, and something I never really got around to because I wanted to do a dossier of these people and just kind of talk about the different figures in this whole movement that was called the Fandom Menace around like just these guys who lived and had this whole like they lived, breathed, and ate, drank, and shit Star Wars, even though they hated it, and it's all they talked about. And to be fair, I don't dislike all of them. Like Critical Drinker.
I've seen a couple things by him here and there.
I am not the biggest fan of Critical Drinker, but I don't think he's like a bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really think he's a grifter. I just think he's
Mm-hmm.
somebody who fell into a niche and, brother, get that bag. I don't really care.
Yeah,
Um,
good work if
there's,
you can get it.
yeah, and I mean, like, that's the thing is I don't really like, I almost don't fault these people for getting an easy paycheck by just bitching about stuff online.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about Doomcock that always got me though, and like I'm not saying he's a bad person inherently. Again, if he can make money off these people and they're going to give it to them, that's their prerogative. That's his game.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's whatever. But the thing that always got me about him is that every single week, without fail, he would come out with a video where he'd be like, "I have insiders in Disney who sent me these leaks,"
Mm-hmm.
and and it was just, dude. Most of those leaks always turn out to be fake. B, how important do you think you are that you have like insider information of people who are going to risk their fucking jobs and violate a number of NDAs to tell you about this stuff? And I'm not mad at him. I was mad at everybody who kept going back to it. It
Mm-hmm.
was, and myself included. Like I didn't really care. I wasn't invested in it. But like after a while, I just realized I was like, God bless, this guy's probably raking in six figures, doing nothing but just tricking people into thinking that Disney's going to go broke tomorrow. Oh, I got a new
Mm-hmm.
memo from the inside that says Kathleen Kennedy's being fired. He had that line for
I've been hearing that since 2016.
yeah, exactly. And it's like, and that's what gets me is like, how stupid are some of these people that they still believe that stuff? Kathleen Kennedy's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that because I again like the bifurcation of nerd culture, at least that specific. I honestly feel like it's the exact same personality type. Like, what are these people except theater kids? They're being performatively mad about diversity in Star Wars or not respecting the lore, whatever it is. To me, it feels like the exact same type of person who's doing the exact same type of content. What's not really even about Star Wars, Marvel, whatever it is at this point. Like, because at least to me, like, and I'll just say I straight up don't even want to get into it, but I disliked The Last Jedi so much that I just, I'm done with Star Wars. If Disney's making it, I'm not watching it. Because what else? There's nothing to say about The Last Jedi anymore. But to me, like it's like I think I'm good. They're not really making Star Wars for the type of fan that I was, and I don't even, just for clarification, I don't mean like the male, whatever. Like, because I used to be Star Wars was one of my main things when I was a kid. I read all the old expanded universe books, played the games. I even wrote into Star Wars Insider magazine and was published twice. So that's my first publishing credit. For the Zoomers in the audience back when magazines were a thing that people would write into. But I got I still have all the old stuff that I like. I don't need to see, Blue Bar Gingo and his Star Adventures or whatever, the fuck they're making now.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. And to bring it back to something you said earlier, where it's like now that the people at Disney have acknowledged these guys like Doomcock,
Hmm.
it does feel like
Hmm.
there's two types of people watching this. The very, very vanishingly small amount of the like modern audience that exists. And let's just get this out up front. The modern audience, by and large, does not exist. Not in the numbers that they want to think they do. They
Hmm.
do. There are still true believers, but they are very, very small in number. And on the other side, you have the guys like Doomcock and the Fandom Menace and all these dudes who just have made sport of trolling Disney. And at one
Hmm.
point, like that's all it's made for at this point. Like you said, I mean, Marvel, Star Wars, all this stuff is literally just made by um, people in Disney who are mad and bitter about people on the internet making fun of them, even though they're probably millionaires, like you said,
Hmm.
and they just want to get back at those guys. And like it's an insane situation. Like I mean, it's turned into these people's personal playground battlefield. And if I was Bob Iger, I would shut that shit down tomorrow.
Hmm.
I would wipe clean the entire Lucasfilm roster and say like each and every one of you get the hell out.
Hmm. Reboot.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah.
like they are burning so much money on this stuff. Like the Acolyte, we brought it up a couple times, but what a historic failure! I mean, that was supposed to be the next big thing, and you want to talk about people who got really butthurt about people on the internet. Did you see that video the girl, the main actress, put
Oh
out
yeah.
where
I
she was
didn't
like,
blank. I didn't watch the actual video. I guess I watched like clips of it because to me, I just don't want to engage with this. But yeah, it was all alt right trolls and racist and white supremacists. And I was like, my sister in Christ, nobody watched this show. It's not like, people are like going into there's this crack team of misogynist racist trolls who are like sneaking into people's houses at night and unsubscribing them from Disney Plus because like to me like maybe I try maybe somewhat more representing the normie viewer in this context because I just checked out and I feel like at the end of the day, like if people don't watch it, that's the important thing because these things are bombing because nobody's watching it, nobody's buying it, and if they're because the other thing like on that note, I remember it was the actress who was in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, the Obi-Wan Kenobi
oh
show,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
I made a similar video about like, there are these racist trolls on the internet and like, I can't, I'm just not the type of person who can let that go. And it's like, what you can't, you're not the type of person who can not log on to Instagram. Because at least to me, like my minor conspiracy, it's not even a conspiracy theory. It's just this pattern that I've noticed that they will make shows that maybe have, or like at least on a baseline level to me, like they look cheap, they're kind of rushed, and I don't know if these are true believers who are behind trying to be more inclusive or what, or they just like are cynically saying, okay, let's put these people in here, they'll get abused online, and then we can, just blame it on the trolls, the racists, right? Because some of these people it's hard to feel sorry for. Other ones, like I do genuinely feel bad for, like, it's not their fault they were in a shitty movie. They're genuinely passionate about it. And, they get just caught between, because if like most normal people, like when they watch Star Wars or Marvel, like, oh, I want to watch space wizards with lightsabers, and I want to watch Marvel where the bad guy gets beat up by the good guy.
Yeah, and I mean, most of those people, I feel like it's a mix. I feel like the people at the top who are pulling the strings are the cynical ones, being like, okay, if this fails, we can pin it on these guys and we don't have to worry about it. And they get a tax write off. But I
Hmm.
think the people at the bottom are the true believers. I think that, like, all the people who are involved in writing and producing the Acolyte are the true believers of that side. Just like I would be surprised if all of these Fandom Menace guys weren't sitting there kind of thinking, you know, do I really want to watch this? Do I really care that much? Do I really have that much to even say about any of this stuff? But man's got to eat. Got to
Hmm.
give the people what they want. I
Yeah.
mean, it is one of those things where I like. You said that like the movies aren't for you anymore. and they're not for most people. They're for that crowd,
Mm.
and I feel like whenever I check back in on Marvel or Star Wars, it's like walking back into a bunch of kindergartners having a food fight, and I'm like, oh, you guys are still at it? Huh? You're not tired yet? Okay.
Yeah, tire yourself out, guys. It's been how many years? Yeah, because there's been, and I guess again, the people I feel bad for, I think there are probably some people who are bad faith, but I think there's also just a lot of creative people like, set designers, animators, costume designers, what have you, who like, just like doing what they want to do. And I really liked Rogue One. I thought Rogue One was really good. That gave me hope for the franchise. I thought The Mandalorian was okay. It felt like I don't know, like a 2007 sci-fi original show. When I mean that in a good way, it was just like, oh, this is fine. It's a show about going on an adventure. There's some like colorful, quirky characters. It's fine. But I stopped watching it about three-quarters of the way through the second season. I was like, I think I got this.
Yeah, no, I mean, Rogue One was probably the only one of those movies I'd actually say was like I liked. I mean, I didn't hate The Force Awakens, but the longer I thought about it, the less I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I have very mixed feelings on The Last Jedi. I don't like it, but
Mm-hmm.
I have weird feelings about it. But the last one, whatever the last one was, I don't even remember what it's called at this point. The Rise
Rise of
of
Skywalker.
Skywalker. Yeah,
Yeah.
that one was. I did not watch that one the whole way through until I went to a casino with my friends, and we went to the cigar lounge and we were smoking, and it was on TV, and we all just got sucked into it watching it, and we were like, "This is one of the worst movies we've ever seen." Like,
It's baffling, isn't it?
it
So
is. It is horrible.
funny story about that. So weirdly enough, that's the one that I enjoyed the most. First of all, because like I'm just not gonna watch it. But years later, my wife and my best friend were like, "Dude, you've got to watch it, but you're gonna get too mad." So they got me really drunk first, and then sometime like, all right, there's something really stupid that's gonna happen. Take another shot, and I kind of enjoyed it because it felt like the fan fiction that I would have written when I was 12. It's like, and then it turned out Ben Solo, and actually he turned good, and Han Solo came back as a Force ghost, and it turned out Rey, she was Palpatine's granddaughter, and then all the Jedi came, and they all helped her, and then they went on a scavenger hunt, and Lando was there, and Chewbacca was there, and it was just so amateurishly done. Like, it startles me, like how are these things getting made? Because it used to be, and maybe this is, our age talking as we become, elder millennials, even bad movies like that people say were so famously bad from, the 90s or 2000s, they're at least competently done. Because like, people like to shit on like Nick Cage movies or like some of the old Fantastic Four movie from like the early 2000s. These
Hmm.
are at least competent, and a
Yeah.
lot of these things don't feel competent. It's just kind of sloppy.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to just a greater decline in like the Hollywood industry. Like, me and my friend were talking about this last night. Like, he's in what do you call it, restoration business, right? Like, they go
Mhm.
in and repair water damage, and it's a side hustle for him. And he's trying to get it off the ground, but he ran into this one adjuster that was just breaking him over the coals, and it's horrible. And the whole thing is like he was complaining about how the people who trained him how to do it would say like, "Oh yeah, back in the day, you just walk in and like do your job, and you'd get the check at the end, and that would be that. And nobody would ask any questions." But now you got to go through all this bureaucracy. You got to get your certs, you got to get your training, you got to get this, you got to get that, you got to follow this book, you got to log everything.
Mhm.
And even when you do it all right, the insurance company still doesn't want to pay you, and they're going to argue with you.
Mhm.
And I think that is like a microcosm of what's happened to everything in America is it's all gotten so bureaucratic, and so like the rent keeping organizations have grown so large that they're actively strangling people who want to and can do these jobs. And it's not, and that goes into the entertainment industry as well, where anybody who actually gives a I'm sure, like you said, most of the people are there because they love it. I've seen how a lot of those the crew members work, and there's no way they would do that if they didn't love it. Though they can work some grueling hours, but they're not allowed to move up in the industry because it's become so stultified and bureaucratic, and there's so many
Mhm.
people at the top who need their back scratched or palms greased or whatever, and they're paying favors to somebody who's paying a favor to somebody else, and X, Y, and Z. It's gotten so incestuous and so just so uh, overly rigid and over controlled that no growth can happen and people can't competently do their jobs. Like my friend with the that I was talking about, if he had done this job the way that the insurance company wanted him to do it, and he did it by the book, like the industry standard book, but they wanted him to do it a different way, which is illegal, and it would put him up for liability if something went wrong. But he was also explaining to me that if he did that, the house would be ruined. All the water would get into the new
Mhm.
drywall, and it would just be. So they're telling him, like, this guy's insurance company is telling him to do the wrong thing so that they can save money. I guarantee you this is like playing out in every industry across America, without exception. And because of this way that these, and I don't want to lay the blame on the feet of the boomers because it's a little too easy, and I
Mhm.
also think it's not entirely true. But a lot of these companies are, like, let's be honest, run by boomers who have an iron grip on this thing and they don't want to let go. And it just gets to the point where, nothing can get done efficiently or well because they won't let it happen because it's a threat
Yeah.
to them or it costs them money.
It is. It feels like we're in such a weird time in culture. Just to kind of build on that, it's just a small anecdote. I remember um, a couple days ago, I was taking a walk. I was walking my dog. And I saw there, this group of like young teenage boys that looked like they're 12, 13 years old, and they're listening to music. And the thing that struck me is like they're listening to Katy Perry, which on one hand, I was like, oh, it's kind of interesting. I remember like probably when we were young, like I don't know about you, when I was 12, 13, you wouldn't catch me dead, listening to quote unquote girl music, which says something about like how that's getting broken down, but also like it was California Girls, which was popular when I was in high school. So,
Yeah.
and to me, that's one of the main things is like, maybe this is happening because like we're still making fucking Star Wars movies and like realistically, like, to your point of like the boomers can't let go of their iron grip of these companies and pop culture. Like, technically, we should probably just stop making these movies and make something new. Because I mean, how much more gas is in these tanks? And I remember reading something not that long, I guess it was maybe a while back now, that Steven Spielberg was saying, by the end of the 2020s, the film industry is just going to collapse. It's getting too expensive. Like you said, it's too incestuous. It's all nepo babies. I don't think he used that
Mhm.
term, but it's kind of like how old Hollywood collapsed. At the end of the 60s, and that's when you saw that new
The
rebirth
new
in the
Hollywood,
set.
yeah.
Yeah, with Spielberg and Lucas and Coppola and all
Yeah.
these people.
Right.
So we're getting to the end of our time. That's a good lead in for the last question that I wanted to ask you. So if that is the case, be it the movie industry or video games, what have you, what is there anything that you do really like right now that's coming out that's new, or is there like any trends that you see that you feel like is giving you hope? Like, oh, I like this. And I'll just say one more thing and throw it back to you, because to me, weirdly enough, and this is something I wrote about recently, I really found myself enjoying the show The Orville, which was Seth MacFarlane. For people who don't know, Seth MacFarlane, a Family Guy, made a Star Trek parody that started out as kind of, pretty much what you'd expect of it's Family Guy in space. But you could tell that Seth MacFarlane loved Star Trek. And my theory is he just kind of like used this as a back door to make a Star Trek show. Because there's a couple episodes, I don't know if you've seen it, that are like genuinely really cool sci-fi concepts that I really enjoyed, and the acting was good, and the writing felt very genuine, like he loved what he was doing. They brought in actors who were either from old sci-fi shows or like people who were just character actors who are on like Law and Order, or people who were Seth MacFarlane who had been working with a long time. So for me, it just became our show that we watched for a while, just because I just loved that it was earnest. I loved that, yeah, it was kind of corny at times, but it wasn't being cynical, it wasn't being ironic, it wasn't trying to shit on the legacy of Star Wars, or quote unquote update it for a modern audience. It was just like a show that felt like would have been made 10, 15 years ago. So do you have anything like that? Is there anything you really like, or any trends that you feel are going in the right direction?
Quite frankly, in the mainstream, no. I mean,
Mhm.
I'll say this: I am checked out in a lot of ways from popular culture. As much as I write about it, I have to go do my research. I'm not in it. I'm not in the thick of it. I'm not
Mhm.
consuming any of it. When things pop up on my radar, I'll go look at it. It's like leaving my nuclear bunker to go scrounge through the
Mhm.
wasteland to bring back news to everyone else, because I feel like most people who are reading me are also kind of similarly checked out of the mainstream.
Mhm. I know
That
I
being
am.
said, that being said, I mean, I do think that there's like some people out there who are doing like a decent thing, like what is it, Chappelle Rowan? I don't know how to
I've
do it
seen it
right.
written. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, I mean, she's her music's okay, but I appreciate the way that she conducts herself on stage and like all this stuff. Like she's got like genuine artistry that I feel like is direly missing from people like and God forbid, God help me if their fans ever hear this, but people like Olivia Rodrigo or Sabrina, whatever the hell, Sabrina Carpenter, and especially I gotta say it, Taylor Swift and Charlie
Mhm.
XCX.
You
They
just
all feel.
destroyed my podcast on
I
episode 2. The
know. I'm
Swifties are coming
sorry.
after me.
Oh, they'll come for me too.
Mhm.
But the whole thing is like they feel incredibly generated, and maybe not generated by the machine. They're like very
Mhm.
cookie cutter. I feel like Chappelle Roan is much more her own thing, and I give her credit for that. Like I said, her music's not really for me, but I appreciate the very clear passion that she has for her artistry, and
Mhm.
it's really sad to see them attack her and tear her down because she said she wasn't going to vote for Kamala.
Oh,
But
wow.
yeah, but aside from that, like I said, she's the only one that comes to mind of anybody who seems to be even
Mhm.
genuine about what they're doing in the mainstream. Outside of that, I really cannot think of anything that I've watched recently that I really liked, or
Mhm.
any music that I thought was. But in the indie scene, no matter where you go, what corner of culture you're looking at, whether it be music, literature, web shows, movies, the best stuff is being done in the indie sphere, where people can
Mhm.
still work and people can still do what they want, and people with passion can still express themselves in a genuine way. And that's why I consume a lot more indie music than I do mainstream music. I'm always on the hunt for new underground bands or artists. Same thing with writing. I mean, geez, if you want good literature on Substack, there are dozens of people publishing their own literature that are better than anything you're going to get at Barnes and Noble at this point. And I think part of it, just to close this out, and I think this is the most important thing and one of the uh, important pieces to the puzzle of why the mainstream continues to, like we were talking about, stultify and um, grow sclerotic and just unable to move on from things. And it's because they have this idea, and I heard this not that long ago, and it's stuck with me ever since. But they have this idea that they have to give the people what they want because it's easy. And not just because they want it, not just because people want it, but because it's easy. It's easier for them to go out and make another Star Wars movie, even if it's bad, for the people who will still buy it just because it's Star Wars, which there are still some. Not many, but there's still some. Enough that they can get some money out of it, and some money's better than nothing. And when I say they feel like they got to give people what they want to make that money, the problem is that people don't know what they want. People don't know that they want new things. And the saying that I was going back to was, I believe it was Henry Ford that was, he supposedly said this, was, if I had given people what they wanted, I would have given them a faster horse.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, I guess with that, that's a great final thought. Do you have anything you want to promote? Do you have any cool articles that you're working on lately? Any other podcast appearances coming up?
I did do a podcast before. He's still working on editing it. I believe it's not out
Mhm.
yet. And when he's ready for me to
Mhm.
post about it, I will. I will definitely let everyone know. As for upcoming things, I've got some fun stuff about the paranormal for October. I'm not going to
Ooh.
do what I did last year and write about Barbie and American Girl for a month.
All
Um,
right.
I'm really looking. I love those articles. Those were a lot of fun to write. But I'm also having a lot of fun revisiting some of these obscure paranormal stories and trying to set the record straight because there's a surprising amount of misinformation about out there about some of these stories about aliens and ghosts and whatever. So
Well, I will
that's
be
what I'm
looking
looking at.
forward to that on bated breath. On a quick small side note, then it kind of reminded for me one of the things that is kind of weird and indie that makes me excited. I don't know if you're familiar with, like, the creepypasta genre, but I feel like, weirdly enough, that's some of the best horror writing that's out right now because it's so creative and it's anonymous that people don't feel like they have to have their name attached to it.
Yeah, no, I actually wanted. I started a series on creepypasta, but I kind of lost. I got sidetracked by other things, and I keep meaning to go back to it. And what I want to do is examine some of those big things. Like I got to Slenderman. That was the one that I did because Slenderman is such a fascinating phenomenon, cultural phenomenon. But there is also stuff like the SCP Foundation. Now you've got the
Mhm.
back rooms and all this stuff, and you've even got lesser ones like the whole Jeff the Killer story. And ultimately, what I wanted to get into was the creepypasta narrator community on YouTube and all their those
Yeah,
guys.
that's what I'm talking about. They're great. Well,
Yeah.
we'll maybe save that one for next time. Um, Ape, so thank you so much for coming on. Everybody, go ahead and subscribe to him if you're not, and we'll close it there. Thanks a lot, man.
All right. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a good time.
Okay, yeah, come on anytime.